your support.
Hey everyone, Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on our 99 Carrera 911. Today we're going to be covering how to replace the oil filler tube on your 996. The idea is going to be similar to a 986 as well. Now, a couple of reasons why you may want to look into this. As we all know, the oil filler tube is the part that we use to fill the engine with oil. Over time, over heat cycles, plastic like this gets pretty brittle. Oftentimes, the accordion portion of this can fail and crack. You'll have a leak every time you fill your engine, as well as a vacuum leak. So we're going to go ahead and use these parts that you see on the table. We have a kit on the site that you can check out that includes an oil filler tube, a new seal, a new oil cap, as well as the hardware with pre-Loctite on the threads used to secure this onto the car. Now we know what we're going to be doing today. Let's take a look at the tools we're going to need for this job. For this oil filler DIY, we have a couple different basic tools that we're going to be using. A lot of these sockets are similar. We have different sizes ranging from 7 mil, 8 mil, 10 mil, 13, all the way to 15, as well as a different array of extensions, 1/4 inch ratchet, 3/8 ratchet. We have a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver, as well as our CTA flex with a 7 mil on the end. We also have a torque wrench for torquing down our bolts on the oil filler tube, as well as a starter. And then some nice to haves are an electric ratchet, a pick tool, and then a magnet in case you drop a couple bolts in the engine bay. Now that we have a rough idea of what we need to get into the oil filler tube DIY, let's get started. The first thing we want to do is disconnect the battery. The reason for that is that we're going to be working near the starter, so we want to avoid harming and shocking ourselves as well as damaging the electricals on the vehicle. I'm going to take a 10 millimeter socket on a ratchet and disconnect our two terminals. Again, that's a 10 millimeter socket needed to disconnect the two terminals. First day on the job. So first, we're going to go ahead and remove our airbox. We're going to unplug our mass airflow sensor by pressing these two tabs in. I like to push it into the box and then pull it back out. I'll free that up. From there, I'm going to remove the oil fill tube. This just pops up and out of the way, just like that. Next, I'm going to remove this hose clamp that connects the intake boot to the throttle body. You can use a flathead screwdriver. I'm using an 8 millimeter socket on a ratchet. And then from there, you want to remove the 13 millimeter bolt that holds the whole box to the engine bay. From there, we can go ahead and give the intake boot a gentle tug and separate that. Then we're going to pull the airbox out and remove the mass airflow sensor wire from the little connecting clip that holds it in place. So to proceed, we're going to go ahead and start by taking off our throttle body. First things first is we're going to remove our throttle cable. This is a 99-year car, so it's got a throttle cable and it's not electric like the newer cars are. So if you're doing this on a 2000, 2001 or newer vehicle, it's just going to be an electrical plug. We're going to actuate the throttle all the way back, and then we can go ahead and pull the end of the cable out and slide it up to the side, and that disconnects that. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove our electrical plug here that connects to the TPS. Similar to the ignition coils, if you saw that video, you want to simply press on that tab until it clicks off and pull the connector out of the way. Now, if you'd like, you can take some painter's tape and label this if you're going to be going further in depth than just this removal. These plugs are kind of all different, so it's going to be a little hard to mix them up, but it can't hurt. You'll probably see us doing that as we proceed. From there, you want to focus on taking out, we have 5 10 millimeter bolts. We're going to remove those. This is just a bracket that helps support it, so we can get this out of the way and work on disconnecting the next plug as well as this hose. Using a 10 millimeter socket and an extension, I'll start with this one right here. and then work my way around the throttle body. You want to do this top right one before you do the top left one, just to give yourself some mobility on this hose, so you don't have to flex it too much. One more thing I failed to mention is you want to unhook the clip that holds the throttle cable in place on the throttle body plate there. I'm going to try using a couple pliers just to push the 2 pins in, and we can push that guy right back. There we go. Flathead. Use the flathead. Now we're going to go ahead and disconnect the sensor. You want to push on this metal tab. It'll disengage it and pull it off. And last, we have this hose that goes to the throttle body. I'm going to use some pliers to undo the clamps and pull that off. Just like that. And pull this hose off. And our throttle body is free. Set this to the side. There's one. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove this air oil separator line that goes to the plenum here. There's going to be a ridge portion on the top and the bottom. We're going to go ahead and squeeze on both of them and try to remove it without breaking it. Of course, we're going to be replacing this on this car, so we're not too worried if we do. If you're not replacing this line, be very gentle with these as the plastic becomes brittle over time, and you can risk cracking it. There we go. Didn't break it. I just used some pliers to put some even pressure on both of the tabs. Obviously, you saw we were able to do that without breaking anything. Just worth a shot if you're having trouble with it like we did. You just push that off to the side. I'm going to use a 7mm socket on a long extension on a 1/4-inch ratchet to take off the 4 hose clamps that remove the plenum here. First, what you want to do is you're going to want to go ahead and break the inner ones first, and then twist the plenum to break it free from the connecting boot. And then from there, we'll tighten these 2 back up, and then we'll loosen up the outer ones to break them free from the manifolds. I'll show you what I mean as we go. First, let's tackle the 2 inner ones. Again, 7mm socket to free these up. All right, now that the 2 inner clamps are loose, let's go ahead and break this free by spinning it just like that. Awesome. Now that those are free, we're going to go ahead and tighten them back up. And now we're going to go ahead and loosen the outer clamps. Now that we've loosened the outer clamps, we can go ahead and do the same thing we did before. Let's break that baby free. From here, I'm going to loosen up the inner clamps again, leaving the outer ones loose, and we're going to work on pulling this baby out of here. Now that all the clamps are loose, we can work on wrestling this plenum out of here. Just like that. Bam, baby. Now we're going to go ahead and remove this boot connector on this end from the plenum. Just careful when you pull it off. There is a vacuum line that runs to it, which I'll show you as soon as we get this off here. So you can see it right here where it pokes through at the end of the screwdriver. So don't forget about that when you're putting this back together. I'm just going to go ahead and push it through, just like that. Here's the feed for it. And then this is on the left side of the engine, on the driver's side. And then same thing on this right side. Just be careful, this one also has a vacuum line going to it in the same spot as the other one. Pull it off. You can see it right here. Just gonna go ahead and push it through. There we go. Same thing. Here's the feed for the one on the right side. At this point, we have access to the 2 bolts that hold this oil filler tube in place. You can see ours is already damaged. Someone's used electrical tape to reunite it. So we're going to take this opportunity to replace it, starting by accessing the 2 bolts in the back. removing them and then getting ready for install. Now in order to get the oil filler tube out, one of the bolts that holds it into place is stuck behind the alternator here, or the end of the bracket, so the alternator has to come out. So in order to get the alternator out, you must remove this bolt up here that goes all the way through, and this bolt right here. These are two 15mm bolts. Before we do that, I went ahead and put some penetrating fluid on the bolt as well as the bushing, due to the fact that we have to hammer this bolt back a little bit to free up that bushing so the alternator can come out. So to get started, we're going to remove our belt. This is also going to be a good time to change your fan belt if it needs to be changed. So let's get started. You're going to want to use a 24mm wrench or socket on a ratchet to undo this tensioner right here and relieve tension from the belt. We have a ratchet with a socket on it, so we'll use this. You're just going to push down on it, and I'm only going to remove the alternator portion of it since we're not taking the whole belt off. Let me start here, just like that, and release. Just let that hang there. You're going to need a 15mm socket to undo both of these bolts. Go ahead and break the top one free. That's as far as we're going to undo this one for now. Let's go ahead and break the bottom one free. All right, now that we got both of these bolts broken loose, this one, if you have a drift hammer or something similar, you're going to want to give it a couple taps. The goal is that you free up the bushing back here. That helps clamp down the alternator to this mounting bracket. So we're going to try a hammer, give it a couple taps, and try to be careful as to not break that ear off the back of the alternator. Now we've given it a couple taps. We're going to go ahead and remove both bolts and see if we can get this out. As you can see, after a lot of hammering and a lot of prying back and forth, we were able to get the alternator free. Now we're going to go ahead and remove these two 8mm bolts that are here on the top of the intake manifold, so we can have some more wiggle room to get this alternator out. That'll let us move this solenoid out of the way. So again, 8mm socket to take these off. And then there's a connector here similar to the ones on the throttle body. You push in, pull off, and that'll free this guy up. I'm going to go ahead and put the two 8mm screws back into their home here, as they're not going to be in the way, and that way I know where they go later. I don't have to go looking for where they could have gone or have to worry about bagging them and labeling them. I just like to thread them back in when I can. So you can see we're prying the alternator up and down and try to loosen it up from the top portion where the bolt goes through into that bushing that you need to hammer back. Finally, we got it up enough where we can twist it out towards us a little bit so we can access the 13mm nut that's on the back of the alternator holding the ground cable. At this point, we have full access to our two 10mm bolts that hold in the oil filler tube. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the oil filler tube, starting by the 10mm bolt that sat behind the alternator. There's one. Now we got the one behind the alternator out. We're going to go ahead and access the one behind our pump here. Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you. Wait. Now we have both bolts removed. We can go ahead and pop up this oil filler tube. Just a gentle pull and out she comes. So now that we have our alternator removed and we have our old filler tube removed, our kit comes with two new bolts that have Loctite on them and a seal. I went ahead and put the seal on already and put a little bit of oil on it just to help lube it in on the way into the block. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're just going to tighten down and finger tighten down one of the oil filler tube bolts. Then we'll go ahead and get the other one sorted, and then we're going to torque them down to about 7 foot-pounds. Now that we have our oil filler tube back on, we can go ahead and put our alternator back in place. Again, our manifold is off only due to the fact that we're also filming another DIY while we're in here. So normally your manifold would still be in place and you would be slipping the alternator back on. We're going to take advantage of it being out to put our alternator back in and give you the best view possible of how that goes in. Let's do it. First things first, so we're going to go ahead and get our plug on. Should have enough slack from our cable to plug it in. That should be good. And then we're going to put our cable back on. This one's the one that runs from the starter. And then put our 13mm nut back on. Start it by hand. Again, this is a 13mm nut. I'm just using a 13mm socket on my 1/4-inch wrench. Just nice and snug. This is all it needs. Now we're going to go ahead and seat our alternator back in its place without trying to crush any wires or anything underneath it. Something like that. From here we can hand thread in our two 15mm bolts. Remember, one rides on the idler pulley, or the idler pulley rides on one of them, I should say. Again, these are two 15mm bolts. I'm just going to use a speed ratchet to get them in there quickly, then we'll snug them down with a torque wrench. This top bolt is going to be torqued to 48 foot-pounds plus or minus 4. The bottom one is going to be 33. There we go. Beautiful. We're going to go ahead and sneak on our first plenum. You want to remember that these little boot connectors have a port in them for the vacuum line, so you want to make sure you route both vacuum lines into each boot connector. It looks something like that. And then these came in pretty far through, something like that. Here's our left one. Same deal, has a port in there for the vacuum line. So let's get that one situated. Right through the hole. I'm going to go ahead and slap this one on as well. You'll see the vacuum line almost acts as a stopper for how far it goes in. And then from there, we're going to go ahead and slip on the front plenum as well. Here's our plenum. Again, you want to make sure your connector for your breather hose is on the same side that the breather hose is on, aka the left side of the vehicle. So we're just going to go ahead and same thing, loosely slip it on, leaving the hose clamps till the very end. Just something like that. Once we get the manifold bolted down, we'll go ahead and adjust our boots on the ends, make sure everything's nice and tight, and tighten down the clamps. We can go ahead and tighten up our front one. Never hurts to throw the throttle body on here real quick, just to align everything and make sure your bolt holes are in the right spot. We went ahead and did that off camera, so we can go ahead and tighten these down now. Again, these are 7mm. Yeah, baby, that was beautiful. Now that our plenum is tightened down, we can go ahead and connect our breather hose back up top here. That should just click in. Careful not to pinch the O-ring. There we go. Clicked in on the top and bottom. That's secure. We're going to go ahead and mount the throttle body. I'm going to start with this top left one up here. Just going to thread it in by hand. Next, we're going to do the bottom left bolt. Next, we're going to do the top right. And now our bottom right. Now I'm going to go around on all four corners and tighten it down evenly. If you're going to torque these down, again, these are small bolts going into a plastic housing, no more than 5 to 7 foot-pounds. And then last, we have our bottom 10 mil nut. This is just a nut that's on a rubber bushing. Doesn't have to be very tight. You don't want to rip the bushing either. Just snug that down. If you remember, we had 2 plugs going to the throttle body. One's going to go here at the bottom. Probably would have been easier if you plugged these in first, but we didn't think of that. There's one. And then we have the second one in the back. This one was the more tricky one to get to when it was in, but nonetheless, we got it here. You okay? And there's 2. Now we have our throttle cable to hook up. I'm just going to pull it out, actuate the throttle all the way back, feed the head in. If it's not coming down all the way like it should, then go ahead and play with the throttle cable in the back. Maybe you need to align it a little bit better. There we go. Now we can feed our new belt in. I'm going to work my way from the water pump up, as this one's going to be the sneakiest to get on. Now I have the belt almost lined up for the most part. Because it's easier to reach up here, I'm going to pull it off this top roller. And put it on everywhere else. Reaching underneath the car to get to this water pump pulley. I'm gonna give it a quick tug. Make sure it looks good on all the pulleys. And now we're gonna put our 24 mil back on the tensioner and try to slip the belt on. This is a new belt, so it's not gonna be as stretchy as the old one. Might be a little bit tighter to get this one on. Just like that. Now we can put our airbox back on and wrap up this job. Now we're gonna put our airbox back in. On the bottom, you'll see there's supposed to be 2 allocating dowels. Ours is missing one, so we're gonna go ahead and make sure the one on the right finds its way in. We're gonna go ahead and slip it in. As we do that, we're gonna run our mass airflow sensor wire through that clip on the corner. There we go. And we can go ahead and line up our airbox. Make sure we get that dowel in its home down below. There we go. We can slip our intake boot on. Now we're going to reinstall our 13 millimeter bolt that holds the box into place. There we go. Oil filler tube can be popped back into its home. I'm using an 8 millimeter socket, however you can just use a flathead. Then we can pop our air tube back in. Just like that. And then last but not least, reconnect our mass airflow sensor. There we have it. And there you have it, my good people. Another DIY in the books. Overall, this oil filler tube replacement wasn't too bad. In our situation, we had our left intake manifold out already as we were doing an air oil separator video. Be sure to check that out. However, not a necessity. All that we need to do is remove the alternator. And you can access the 2 bolts that hold the oil filler tube in place. A couple basic tools is all you're going to need. If you guys like what you saw in this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments about what we did today, leave those in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. We'll catch you on the next one.